So to introduce us now, we're gathered via Zoom once again. This time it's myself, Garth Evans, with Maud Bryt, who has sent us a short video of images from the Willard Boepple show at Pamela Salisbury Gallery in Hudson, along with a few clips of film that a colleague who lives close by the gallery took for us. And we're going to try and attempt to talk about this sculpture show based on these images. I think Jock Ireland is here, and he has not seen the show. He's only seen these photographs and film. Brandt, I think, Brandt Junceau did see the show. So we will be able to get a kind of contrasting view from him, perhaps, to what we're getting looking at these images. So we've batted this thing around quite a bit, you know, and my sense was that we can't really talk about this sculpture, or at least I have great reservations about attempting to talk about it, just based on these images that we have, and not having actually had an opportunity to experience the work in person. And really thinking that we should base this discussion on the difficulties that arise when one is talking about sculpture and has only photographs or film of the work. So how this conversation will turn out, I'm not sure, but I think we do need to address in this era of COVID-19, and when, you know, so much of what we are obliged to do is look at things on a screen rather than actually travel somewhere and confront them in person. It's just a whole different experience, and it seems to me that when it comes to sculpture, it's a profound distinction to be made between confronting the thing in a kind of physical space that you're sharing with it, and confronting an image of the thing on a flat screen. So how to begin? Where to begin? My sense is that I have very little idea what I really think about, feel about this work. I mean, I should also say that Willard Boepple is somebody I think I know Jock knows him, Maud knows him. Not sure that Brandt is familiar with him, but he is someone I personally consider a friend. So that adds another dimension to what anything one says about the work. And I have seen, you know, Willard's work in the past, which gives me some kind of help in responding to this particular work. You know, I have a lot of questions which maybe Brandt, having seen the work, can answer. I mean, I really have a serious question about the scale of these works, the size of them. They all seem to me to be they feel very much like models for things. Just looking at the images, and I don't know whether that's a function of the image or it would actually be the case if I saw the things. I also have a question about the finish of them. They seem very highly kind of like finished. I mean, there's a sense of them being, and I assume they're made out of wood for the most part, but then, you know, they're so smooth, the surfaces are so refined, you can't actually tell what the material is. Although I imagine if one saw them in person and could look at the way things are joined, you would know very quickly what the material was and how they were put together. But how they're put together is unclear to me. So that's another question I have. I don't have the answer to. The range of work is there are a number of pieces that are made out of very thin, relatively thin elements, linear elements, kind of drawn in space. And they tend to be horizontal in format. And then there are other much chunkier works made out of blockier pieces of material. And again, I assume it's wood. Everything is colored, painted, I assume. And most of the pieces, at least I think most of the pieces, are more than one color, although some of them are just a monochrome. So I leave it open there. That's my just opening kind of thoughts. Somebody else say something.
I think they are all wood, with the exception of the smallest pieces that were 3D printed and are just feather-like, like the piece in the window or the horizontal pieces. But I think all the ones that are pedestal size or table size are wood and painted, and they are very carefully finished, very uniformly, evenly finished. No brush strokes, no tones. It's monochrome colors.
And the surfaces, Brandt, are they as matte as they appear, or are they like an eggshell satin?
Yeah, it's somewhere in the eggshell satin spectrum, and I can't remember if there's any changes in that. I might be forgetting a piece that has like an eggshell and a flat finish. I don't recall.
You say 3D printed?
Yeah, I mean that piece on the wall in the last shot was 3D printed.
I have two thoughts. I mean, about feelings about them. I mean that, and again, I mean I hesitate to say almost anything, but to me, everything. I think if they were really heavy and made out of blocks of steel, I would think differently about them, and I also think, on the other hand, if they were just rougher, I mean, if the wood were relatively, unfinished, and these things had the sense of being cobbled together, relatively quickly. They feel more like that than than things that have been so very carefully constructed and composed and contemplated and worked through and worked out and worked over and reworked. They don't come across to me as like, terribly refined. I mean, look at that joint there, the one that's facing us right in the middle of where this, yeah, exactly. I mean, that's just downright annoying. And would be fine if the whole thing were just much more raw.
Yeah, they feel almost like pieces in addition.
Well, they could be. I mean, right. Presumably they could be. They're composed out of elements that would be easy to reproduce, and could be, put together again differently. But they're not cast, so it wouldn't be that kind of thing, would it?
Right. Yeah, it's a feeling rather than something that's physically evident.
But how do you get that feeling? I mean, what is it about them that makes you think?
that kind of finish, that's so consistent and uniform, and the simplicity of the color scheme, and it's also the wood is finished in a way that you associate with building. I mean, with architecture.
Yeah.
I think the wood is maybe like a poplar or a basswood, something very close grained that we use for molding. And the paint and the color both seem to me very close to domestic
Yes,
finish.
yes. Yeah, but I mean, I think this comes back to a sense of scale. I mean, they either, they just feel to me like too domestic in their scale. Whereas in some way, they either need to be diminutive, so they become like little intricate things, or they need to be much bigger. That's I mean, I'm looking at images, so this is the big thing that I feel I have no real idea whether that's true or not. And that if I were in that space with them, I may just feel that they are like, rather badly behaved animals, and I would want to kind of like, be with them and try to, or they're very well behaved animals. I don't know, but I don't have a sense of how I would relate to them. But just seeing the images, I feel uncomfortable about. I want the objects to somehow, and it may be just that I want this sense of being in a relationship to them, and that I'm missing it, and therefore I'm complaining about something.
I think, to come back to the photography of sculpture issue, it's best thing for sculpture, I think, to be photographed in some non-white cube setting where one instantly, instinctively picks up sense of scale and some kind of personal relationship to the object that you have with the space that you see it in. And in this loop, it's all gallery shots on pedestals and white walls, so that you're really getting next to none of that.
Well, you are getting it. I mean, you do have a lot of clues as to how big the things are. I mean, these are not the classic kind of, shots of sculptural objects in a totally kind of, with just a white or a gray background and nothing else. Yeah. No sense of where the thing is. That way in which we have evolved to, museums and all of us, photograph objects with completely kind of zero information about anything other than the object.
Yeah.
And so you get a sense of the window and the pedestal, and you can see the floorboards in some of these images. You get a very clear sense of just, I mean, I think I know how big they are, but I don't feel how big they are.
I've recently been looking at a lot of Smith and Calder, and of course, the best Smith photography is his own. And I think a difference between that kind of photography and this is that here you have a minimal set of cues as to scale and height of the thing, the viewpoint of the camera, the viewer. But in a Smith's photographs, you really have the sense of it being somewhere in the real world, even when they're at their most graphic. You have a sense of time of day and place, and some prejudice on the part of the photographer. There seems to be a real viewpoint.
Yeah, well, I think Smith developed a whole kind of, photography seems to have been a very integral part of his practice.
Yeah.
And his photographs of his sculptures are very varied, I think, but a lot of them are quite pictorial in a sense, that he's making a kind of graphic image in many cases. In many cases, I mean, again, like if you think of Brancusi's photographs of his own work, you don't get a very good sense of what the object is, but you get some kind of sense of what the object is about. And I think Smith is doing something similar.
Yeah.
You guys are making a lot of good points about the limitations that we're faced with. But I'm pretty relaxed about it. You know, I've looked at a lot of sculpture in photographs, in books, the complications with engaging with sculpture sort of indirectly is there. I'm just familiar with them, and I'm surprised that you're not as relaxed as I am about talking about this work. I didn't see the show, but I was delighted to see the photographs, to see that the thing was up in a gallery. Yes, it feel cramped. I would prefer to be directly engaged with the work, but it doesn't stop me from being enthusiastic about the show and the wide range of things in the show. Garth, you were talking about the scale, and the scale of the wooden pieces versus the scale of the sintered nylon or pieces. That does seem to me to be an interesting distinction, and that's the scale issue that engages me with this show. I'm not troubled by the sense in which these are smaller pieces than usual for Willard, and they don't feel like maquettes or models to me. Willard deliberately decided to move into to make some smaller things, and made some interesting smaller things, and made some very small things with the 3D printing. And that the sense in which the wooden pieces are kind of relaxed in there, and the sintered nylon pieces seem, I haven't seen any directly, but they seem to be much more anxious, and in a very interesting way. And this whole idea of making things, sort of tiny things with the 3D printer is just interesting, exciting. I'm glad Willard's giving it a try, and I'm challenged by it. And really, I would like to see them all directly, and hope in maybe a year or something we'll have another opportunity to see them. But I'm still excited by the.
Yeah, I hear you. I'm sorry, I can't get there. I can't be so relaxed. I think the whole discussion of the way in which sculpture has been moved since the development of photography by photography is an interesting question. The extent to which sculptors have made work to be photographed is an interesting question. I did know a sculptor who made his work specifically, because he said most people are only going to see a photograph of it. So this is what I'm concerned about, how it will look in a photograph. And he was a fairly successful sculptor. But that's an aside. I'm not suggesting for a minute that photography is some kind of enemy of sculpture, but I do think that it is something that I want to be alert to and aware of, that, you know, that it is the way most people and most of us engage with sculptural objects. But it is not what they're about. They're not about, you know, flat images on a piece of paper or on a screen.
Right, but you don't, at least I don't look at, you know, I think of Bonnard's paintings, and, you know, people will say that he painted from photographs. And, you know, apparently that's a legitimate way of describing what he did, in that he had photographs of models and whatnot and looked at them as he was painting. But to describe his work as, you know, when you say he painted from photographs, you could talk about those photorealists, and they painted from photographs too, but they painted very differently from the way Bonnard painted. And we've, you know, everybody's going to look at a photograph differently, and we have sort of lots of experience with sculpture and can look at a photograph and make that, you know, the distinction you make about Brancusi's photographs being photographs about what the sculptures are about rather than what they sort of look like, that's a legitimate distinction and a reflection of your sort of sophistication. That, you know, you look at photographs differently from the way a lot of, you know, young art students look at photographs, and particularly of sculpture.
Yeah. So, and just to go back a step, I mean, these pieces that I'm now being told are very tiny, and that are 3D printed objects. I did not know that. I mean, I guess I could have discovered that information if I'd done a little more research, but I did not know that. And so I want to see them again, because I'm now confused as to just how big they are. You know, presumably they were larger objects that were scanned and then, you know,
yeah,
reduced and printed. I mean, I doubt Willard made them if they are as tiny as you indicate they are. I mean, I don't know how tiny are they, like 8 inches long? Or?
Yeah, the 12 inches, 8 inches, they're, you know.
That makes them of interest to me in some way. I mean,
yeah, it's an exciting idea. Bruce has had his big figures reduced, and it's interesting what happens when they dramatically, you know, they become dramatically smaller.
That is a wooden piece, right? That's not a 3D.
No, that's a sintered nylon. It's 12 by 12 by 12.
Huh. 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 That is extraordinary. And that one?
Yeah, I think that's 5 by 14 by 4.
I assumed they were in the same, approximately the same size as the other pieces, which are not huge, but I mean, there must be like, you know, 20 inches, 24 inches.
Yeah, 18 by 24, 17, 27 by 20, 18 by 20 by 10.
Yeah, so they're not that different, really.
Somehow I've seen enough of them that I've, you know, been interested by them.
Mm-hmm. I would like to see them, because now that is not that's a wooden piece. I can see a screw.
Yeah, that's 17 by 18 by 16.
Yeah, that's it. I mean, this is, you know, this work is in a language, you know, that I am sympathetic to and familiar with, and you know, and so I have a kind of general disposition towards being, you know, both on the one hand, very well disposed towards it, and on the other hand, highly critical of it, as one does with things that sort of feel potentially close to one's own practice.
Yeah, and we're all familiar with this kind of work, and inclined to dismiss it as too familiar, too easy. But it's striking to me that Willard has kept at making this stuff, and other people have kept at working, you know, with, you could call it abstract sculpture. You know, I don't want to get into all of those, I don't know, arguments, Greenberg and all that. But a lot of people are making sculpture like this, and but it's all different too. You know, Robin Greenwood is doing something like that, but he's doing it with steel. And Tim Scott's, he's even making wooden things now. And Chris Duncan and Joel Shapiro, and
yeah,
you know,
yeah, Joel Shapiro maybe, but then Joel has a kind of you know, a figurative element in his work, which is totally absent from these works, which seem to me to be determinedly abstract. Their references would be to, you know, domestic furniture of one kind or another. Or
yeah, but not these are beginning to engage with you know, there's wrestling involved in some of the titles anyway, and that it's, you know, Willard is easy to take for granted, but he's thinking. He's always, you know, he's not turning out a product. He's challenging what he's done in the past.
I have not, from the images, discerned any sense of, you know, a kind of entanglement, a kind of struggle, a kind of elements in some way in disharmony. The aim seems always to be a kind of architectural unity.
Well, yeah, that has been, you know, a lot of Willard's work is like that, and you could say pictorial in a way that this image is. But here's Reach. The title for this piece is Reach, and there's, you know, the idea of wrestling or a figurative dimension to this piece is, it seems to me, not unreasonable, and you know, a move from a kind of pictorial inspiration to a more three-dimensional kind of sculpture is that's half Nelson, the green one. You know, a wrestling move.
Yeah.
You know, and it's not, Willard is not a assertive, screaming and shouting kind of guy, but it's a subtle and interesting sculpture to me, and you know, I wish I could see it live, but even through the photograph, I'm able to, you know, project, or, you know, I don't think I would be disappointed by the real thing.
Yeah, the titles certainly are I mean, intriguing, the ones you've given me, looking at those pieces. they make any difference for you, Brandt? The titles that Jock has just, I mean, did you know them?
No, I don't recall them. They seem a bit of a stretch. You know, the treatment from piece to piece is so uniform. And I mean, he's really kind of declined every opportunity to give the elements some kind of fiction that bears out those titles. You know, I don't collect a feeling of the piece sort of wrestling with itself, you know, for a title like Half Nelson.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it is not insignificant though that he has given them those titles.
Oh, sure.
And I, you know, I immediately find myself wondering at what point they acquired those titles. You know, how long after their completion, or were they there somehow or other? Not necessarily those particular titles, but that range of experience was somehow there at the beginning. You know, since it was going to try and make something that engaged a kind of physical sensation of reaching or stretching or being held in a particular position. You know, those titles, and I mean, Jock, do you have more similar titles?
Well,
like that?
there's the yellow one that we're seeing is of interest in that it's untitled.
Huh.
And I think, and I don't want to speak for Willard, but I do remember a studio school lecture or something, and he did talk about titling things after he'd finished.
Yeah.
But I think he consciously is moving into this more 3D territory as opposed to a more pictorial kind of sculpture, which you know, he moves over the years. He's moved from a kind of congested work to work that kind of clears things out, and then he congests things, jams things together, and then he sort of clears things up. And this is what we're looking at now. What's it called? Canter. But you can see the front view would be pretty pictorial, but he's complicating that. And he goes further in complicating it in pieces like Reach and in the untitled yellow one. Actually, it's called Untitled Yellow.
I come back to wanting to see the damn things. I really want to see how, you know, it's a lot of these joints. I can't quite tell how the angles are or how they fit together, or, you know, the pieces seem to be a combination of things that are very, you know, elements that are very carefully kind of put together, and things that are almost thrown in. This is where I find myself wanting to be able to inspect the damn things.
Yeah, and there is with Willard, you know, you notice the bits of wood that he uses are, you know, you can measure this piece of wood. It's 12 inches long, and the saw cut it off here, and there's a right angle there and a certain angle. there are all kinds of measurable things involved with the actual objects. But he tries to get out of that, or there's a tension between the measuredness of the parts and the kind of unmeasured dimension that he's trying to get at with his pieces. And that's something that that the photographs really do cut off, but it's there, or you know, at least I believe in it, and I'm looking for it, and trying to project that
So
into.
this piece we're looking at, this purple lilac piece,
Yeah.
What is that? Is that wood or steel?
That's
It's welded. Can we go back? It looks like it's welded.
Yeah, it's polychromed oak.
Really?
And the title is Purse. And it, you know, you could say glued, but or say welded, but it looks like it's glued.
Yeah, yeah.
And it's a sort of old-fashioned pictorial Willard. It's a piece that could come out of that that Brock painting, the homage to J.S. Bach at MoMA.
Yeah, you see, I cannot tell, looking at this image, that bottom element, not the curved element, the one that's the block that's behind it,
Yeah.
how close to the ground that is, and it's not parallel to the ground, and is it touching the curved element at its right-hand end, or is it just suspended from that leg of the sawhorse on the left? How is that meant? Is it touching the curved element all the way along, or I mean, I have no idea where it is in space.
It's on the same plane as the bottom foot. There's the basic sawhorse, and it's on the floor, like touching the back leg.
Yeah.
If you look at where the shadows are.
I think you're probably right, but the image is misleading. It looks as if it's off the ground. And so yet when I see where it joins the rear left-hand leg of the sawhorse, it's clearly at the base of it. And so I got the impression, and judging by the shadow or the light underneath it, looks as if maybe it's rising up slightly off the ground at a slight angle. I mean, you know, it's really just very frustrating. And where is that little small vertical block, and how deep is it? You know, how far back does that go?
Yeah.
Is it square? Is it just a thin element? It could be curved. I have no idea.
I think in Smith's style of sculpture and of photography, he kind of dwells with these ambiguities, you know, and plays on them deliberately, in a sense that I don't think that these pieces are trying to do.
No, I think you're right. I think you're right about Smith, and I think you're right about this. I mean, this seems to be, you know, an attempt to just disclose the object as straightforwardly as possible. Maybe not as straightforwardly as possible, but it is, I think, making a, you know, simplifying it and making an image out of it.
It's more like Caro in a way. Like what you see is what you see.
More like what?
Like Caro than Smith.
Yes, yes, yes. I mean, this work is you know, is quite close to a lot of Tony Caro's work, except in scale and material.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, in some ways, you know, uncomfortably close.
Yeah, but also consciously close. And it's interesting, there isn't the bombast of Caro. There,
Ooh.
Willard is a much
Ooh.
quieter guy.
I'm going to leave that aside.
But, yeah.
I go back to one of my original kind of comments in a way. I'm more and more kind of like feeling that, and this is why the 3D printing pieces, seem to kind of interest me, because they would remove the whole issue of how they're made and how they're finished. If they're 3D printed, that's it, and you don't have an issue of the kind of handling in the way that you do with these things, the handling and the finishing. And my sense of wanting them to be more immediate, so that I see the wood, and I see the joints, and I have a sense of them having it kind of put together with a kind of directness, rather than that whole process being concealed by the finishing.
Yeah, but that it also creates a distance. Willard's, Robin Greenwood, you can feel every cut of the steel, and it's put together spontaneously. And but Willard is not Robin Greenwood, and he isn't as direct.
This image that we're looking at now, this is a 3D printed piece, presumably. I mean, it's fascinating, but I have no idea where it is spatially.
Yeah,
the ambiguity makes it interesting.
Yeah.
And there's some anxiousness, it seems. It just, even in the photograph, and here's another one. Is there a sculpture? Are the shadows part of the sculpture or not? It makes me nervous.
They're very much part of the image, but whether they bring the sculpture to life in a way that it wouldn't have without them is an open question.
Yeah, but it's the shadows are like the marks that you're looking for in the wooden pieces. They're part of the moment that you're looking at the sculpture, and it depends on where the sun is in the sky, and that's interesting to me.
I don't quite follow that.
But this sculpture, and the instant that the photograph was taken, is completely, or not completely, but very different from this. If the photograph were taken an hour later with the sun in a different place, and it's different if it's in your apartment or in Maud's apartment,
or not on a white surface.
Exactly. Yeah. But that is a way that it engages the whole world, and that's interesting to me. That.
Yeah, but we're talking about an image here. We're talking about a photograph. We're not talking about the object.
Yeah, but I've looked at sculptures before, and I looked at the sun before. All of that experience is easy to bring to this image.
Yeah, I disagree. I disagree. I mean, I have no idea what this object feels like.
Yeah, and neither do I. And I want to, but I really want to see it because of the photograph.
It's literally light as a feather. It's like a physical thrill. You pick it up and it's like, it's almost like it wasn't even there.
Yeah, that isn't, and isn't that strange? Doesn't it, make you sort of anxious somehow? What is real, and all of that.
Those are the pieces I was most engaged by. I
Sorry.
mean, I know that they're models, or were models, or
But they're not. It seems that they're not models. They're
at this point.
Yeah, and he started with the big thing, or at least that's my fantasy, and then he reduced it, and he reduced it for maybe economic reasons. Maybe the small ones will sell, and all of that. It's not that Willard is selling out, but the economics of the world we live in are affecting his work, and in a healthy, intelligent way.
Yeah, it's fascinating. I mean, that is a fascinating image, and in many ways, if you compare that to the prints that are on the gallery walls, that's, to me, much more engaging, fascinating, curious. But I have no idea what it would be like to pick up that object, or to walk around it. And again, it's that I'm told it's a 3D print is where it feels like it should be made out of pieces of steel or aluminium that are carefully placed and tacked together. And that process of moving something a little bit this way, a little bit that way, holding it with some, with a clamp of some kind, a little, and then tacking it together, and then, adding another piece, taking a piece away, cutting this shorter, that kind of process isn't going on. It maybe went on, but you wouldn't have any feeling for it, engaging this object, from what I understand. But
yeah, but instead of that set of feelings, you have a different, and what seems to me to be a brand new set of feelings.
Yeah, and you touched on something a minute ago, Jock, when you said that the finishing created distance. That does seem to me to be an issue that we're talking about here. I mean, not only in the way the work is finished and 3D printing create distance between you and the author of the work, but talking about them in images like this is a totally distancing thing. That is the problem. We are so removed that I come back to my sense of what is it we're talking about? We're talking about photographs. And this is a perfect example. We're talking about photographs.
Well, you're just sort of cutting your head off when you say that. You've got an imagination, and you can bring that to the photographs.
Yeah, you're right. Of course I can. And that's where I come undone, because I can seduce myself into thinking that I know what this object is like.
Right.
But I don't, and it's I'm liable to come to very wrong conclusions about
Yeah, and there's nothing. It seems to me that's part of the fun.